Hello folks, this is going to be my review of Biomutant, with my personal praises and issues included. I completed the game in 12 hours and got to the ending before making this review so I can provide a critique that captures the full experience. There are some aspects I enjoy playing, but there are lots of other minor problems that begin to pile up and become quite apparent over the course of the game. Let's start with my most important factor, the gameplay. This game has a mix of combat encounters and exploration, with a lot of loot to find along the way. Biomutant is officially described as an action RPG. Some people say this game is similar to Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, but let me tell you, Biomutant is definitely not a character action game. Your combat routes and options are pretty limited, even though there are 3 different methods to deal with fights. You can be a melee fighter, a ranged gunner, a spellcaster, or a combination of all 3, but you don't really have the freedom to combo the way you want. Even though the game has a stinger, you can't combo that into high time or anything else. It turns into a hard knockdown on smaller enemies, and the larger ones don't even get staggered. I would say this game is pretty close to a Far Cry game, with simple combat from the early God of War days. By Far Cry games, I mean the latter releases where you conquer or free smaller campsites until you unlock enough to fight the leader and gain control of the region. Repeat this 3 to 5 times and you will complete the first half of this game. However, after gaining control of half the tribes, the game will ask you if you want to continue or automatically get the remaining tribes to join you. At this point, I was already getting tired of the combat sequence and taking over encampments. It seems the developers might have realized this as well. Why else would they give this blatant option to the player? The biggest reason I was disappointed in the combat is the enemy reaction. You have 1 melee string per weapon type, and the enemy barely reacts to your hits. Sometimes they stagger a little, but it's inconsistent and doesn't match your animation. There is also a parry system similar to the Batman Arkham games, with the Spidey Sense indicators to match. Landing a parry feels fine, and you get a counter afterwards, but that's only for the small enemies. The larger ones are usually too big, and their counter indicators are off the screen. The best time I had with combat is by going with a long-range gun build. That way I can stay back and actually see what the enemies are doing. There is a magic route as well, but the offensive spells are very limited. You will be using the same 2 or 3 spells to do damage for the entire game. There is also the Super Wung Fu mode, where you can do 4 invincible attacks on the enemies. You need to do 3 Wung Fu combos to enter that state. And the supers aren't even that great. I'm able to finish a fight a lot faster just by staying back and blasting foes with my gun than trying to land 3 Wung Fu combos to build my super gauge. The 2-handed rifle build ended up being my most effective way for me to do damage in combat. It did way more DPS than going the melee or caster route. The combat eventually felt like a chore, so I wanted to finish them as fast as possible, hence my gun-based playstyle. The other major aspect is the exploration and looting. There's lots of buildings scattered in the world of Biomutant, and each location tracks the amount of rare loot and interactables in the area. The majority of the buildings and caverns are easy to enter, and I get excited when I find a legendary, or even better, a relic item. This is probably ingrained into my brain from Diablo 2 way back then. There's lots of randomized items to find in this game, from weapon parts used to craft a stronger arsenal, to armor pieces and attachments. They vary in stats from defense to bonus crit rate to resistance towards certain elements and the environment. You can craft weapons by combining different parts, but it mostly comes down to picking the components with the highest numbers. Find the weapon type you like and hope you get strong parts for that weapon. It's pretty much the same for armor. You can apply add-ons or attachments to your gear to increase their stats. And that was the part I enjoyed most about the game. I am using was because I got lucky with my weapon around 6 hours in, and I was not able to find anything else to replace it for the other 6 hours when I finally hit credits. A lot of the building layouts are also repeated throughout the game. Even though there's lots of locations, there's a much smaller amount that looks unique. Besides freely raiding cabinets and refrigerators, there are puzzles scattered across the world, but once you solve one of these, you solve them all. The majority of these puzzles have you rotating knobs or switches to line them up. The problem is the difficulty. There is no thinking needed to solve these puzzles. You pretty much just put the correct colors next to each other. The game might have too many loot locations as well. Just take a look at the world map. Every one of these blue circles are locations of interest that I have not explored yet, and the space between one location and another is very empty. Most of the time, I just run from one spot to another without anything to do in between. There are rare cases with enemy encounters, but I already mentioned how I feel about the combat of the game. There is also no indicators of a fast travel location on your map until you reach there. I do like the detail of how you claim fast travel spots to pee on them to mark your territory, but I'm pretty sure I missed a ton of fast travel locations in the latter part of the game. Normally, this isn't a big deal, but this game requires you to travel back and forth for quests all the time. These quests and side quests remind me of the newer Assassin's Creed games from Origins onward. Maybe instead of a Far Cry vibe, I should be calling this a Ubisoft vibe. If you don't like fetch quests, then you definitely will hate these. Almost all of the main quests are asking you to travel to another location and bring back something. Eventually, you will complete enough tasks to be ready to fight the 4 World Eaters, which is the other main objective similar to taking over the tribes. Those fights are vehicle-mounted fights. Instead of fighting on foot, you will be piloting a submarine or a mech to do damage. There is one where you ride a mount and shoot the World Eater with your gun, but most of these other boss fights do not actually depend on your gear. The sound design is pretty lackluster right now. Here is an unedited scene of a tribe siege where I get catapulted inside, but there is a heavy lack of impact. It's just so weird to see that kind of cutscene almost being silent. Here's another one that is definitely missing something. Let's see if we can make this more memorable. Ah, that's much better. I'm not sure why this is the case, but almost all the cutscenes in the game has no music. This might be a bug or something put on low priority, because on May 29th, the devs tweeted about an upcoming patch that will improve the sound of the game, along with a bunch of other improvements. Outside of the cutscenes, there are background and ambient music, so it's not that bad while you are roaming and exploring the wilderness. For dialogue, the only recognizable speech will be from the narrator. There is a heavy Stanley Parable vibe from his tone and narration. All the other character speeches are gibberish, and the narrator repeats each line after the gibberish sounds are over. If the narrator is too overwhelming for you, there are options to turn them off. There are also good, bad, light, dark dialogue choices throughout the game, but it doesn't really change anything in the game. Your light and dark points only affect what spells you can learn. You will need 30 points to unlock the last spell of each tree, and there's enough points throughout the game to get every spell, even though most of them feel pretty useless. And related to dialogue is the story. It's nothing special, just your normal saving the world or taking control of it. None of the characters were memorable or really stood out to me. I like media with a post-apocalyptic setting, but the game mostly used that setting for quick jokes and puns. In summary, I enjoyed the looting aspect of the game, was indifferent to the story, felt the quests were lackluster, and was disappointed in the combat from their initial promise. This game has lots of elements that can make it great, but each individual part is not solid enough on their own, and Biomutant feels lesser than the sum of its parts. The first impression probably does not help either, since the tutorial spans a couple hours. Like most tutorials, this one starts out pretty slow as well and limits you on what you can do, so giving that to players as their first impression of the game might not be a great start. If you're interested in some of the highlights I mentioned for this game, then get it when there's a big sale or discount. The devs are working on patches and updates, so maybe some of these issues will be improved in the future. I do appreciate them adding all the QA folks in the credits. Not many studios do that. Anyways, all the elements for a great game is present, and if they can fix most of them, then Biomutant may shine brighter in the future. And that's my review. Thanks for watching.